Bernice Warden had been murdered. They'd caught Eddie because he was the one that had done it.
Did you remember getting any blood on him when you cut her?
I told him where the clothes were.
Where did you have the clothes?
So that was hung up right back to the door.
I knew Bernice well. She'd been gutted out like a deer.
Well, you don't remember undressing her?
No, that's it. See that? If I hung her out, no, well, that probably had to be longer than I.
It was very hard to visualize somebody doing that to a human. But we didn't know the peculiar thoughts that went through Eddie's mind at that time.
In other words, the clothes were off her before she was hung up.
That must have been her else. Well, maybe I don't remember.
What period was that? Remember?
Eddie is such a mythic figure. Hearing this actual human voice,
I can't even remember that.
it just makes these crimes that much more real.
But now, we want to get this all straightened out. Clean that.
Well, we've been debating for years, like, what did Ed Gein sound like?
I have been playing Ed Gein in my brain for so long.
What did you intend to do with her body, Mr. Warden? That,
Well, you kind of thought you were there, honey.
that's the way it could be.
He sounds just as bewildered as I always expected him to.
Sure.
Always wondering, why did I do this? What possibly could have driven me to dig up these women, to make these, costumes, to do all of this? Like, he's marveled.
My first reaction to him talking is he's actually a lot more canny than I thought he was. Is that listening to him react, he knows there are things he can't tell the police.
It's almost like he's already known that this has been going on for so long and he's surprised that they're shocked.
Yeah.
He's almost ignorant of his own macabre ways. It's crazy.
That's what people said again and again during his confessions, people who spoke to him, is that people would start off a little bit hard towards him and then they would become sympathetic, because the way they described him was as a little boy, a demented little boy,
Yeah.
but a little boy nonetheless.
Was he right, don't you?
Well, now, would you do this after?
Ed Gein had the emotional, social maturity of a small child who was, on all accounts, very dependent on his mom. When I listen to the tapes, and he seems very suggestible, he's somebody who seems very passive.
How many graves did you open?
Well, and
When you cut the bodies apart?
well, there's some I never even,
Never took home?
that's right.
Just opened up the
That's right.
caskets and
That's right.
cut them apart there.
That's right.
He didn't go through the kinds of stages and the maturation that a person would go through if they, were allowed to socialize and have friendships outside of the home and lived in a place where he had that kind of support. He had never really developed into a full-fledged self.
This is the front of the Waushara County Jail as it looked in 1957. This is where the Ed Gein tapes were actually made. And then the back of the building was actually where Ed Gein was held. Everything inside the building is still original in 1957. He actually came out of this door to go to the courthouse. First night he got here, they put him in a drunk tank to protect him from all the people at Plainfield. I thought they'd be coming to get him. Then after that, they moved him into his regular cell. Ed Gein's cell is directly beyond that second window. He was here for 3 days and 2 nights.
This is a small town in Wisconsin.
Where they just know that train's coming.
They know it's coming, and if you're law enforcement, this is not what you want.
We aren't going to say anything about it to anybody.
You do not want this stain on your community. People are humble, but they have a lot of pride in being good people.
Also, it happened under your nose.
Under your nose?
You know, like you did not know that this ghoul was operating right next to you.
The relics of Hollywood representations of serial killers is that they're kind of like geniuses who are plotting and scheming the perfect murder and building a whole kind of like structure around getting away with it. He's an example of somebody who was not doing that. He was acting in plain sight.
But I told them, I can't understand it.
No one knew of the existence of this tape. Till now, everyone, and myself included, believed that his first confession came much later than this, when he was taken to the crime lab. The fact that he was interviewed in the jail cell immediately after he was taken into custody changes our view of the whole timeline and sheds very different light on the case. When Sheriff Schley discovered Bernice Warden's naked corpse strung up by her heels, Gein is actually not at home, but he is at a neighbor's house having dinner. One of the sons suddenly comes in and says he's heard that Bernice Warden has gone missing. And there's a big commotion in town. And, you know, he wants to go into town and see what's going on. And Ed volunteers to go with him.
I was away, you know. I was out all the time, and then Bobby Hill come in with me.
Ed makes some kind of weird remark at the time, almost indicating that he knows something dreadful has happened. But before the two of them could leave, the two deputies who have been dispatched to the Hills house show up, and they take Gein into custody.
Also just told them they found some more head stuff like
Still?
Yeah. So there must have been more graves, huh?
The search of his house was actually going on at the time this interview was taking place. So the full extent of Gein's horrors had not even come to light yet.
So there's a bunch of photographers from the newspaper who want to take a picture. You want to take a picture? No, it's not yet. We'll get taken off.
Here's this socially isolated, clearly disturbed individual. He finds himself being questioned by the authorities, for the people who were interrogating him. And I guess they were trying hard not to be overly judgmental. They weren't being harsh with him, or they weren't threatening him. But, I mean, he was really in a kind of odd spot. All of a sudden, you know, the truth is revealed.
Much more would be discovered in the coming hours and days as investigators excavated this archaeological dig in hell, coming upon all of these horrors. Gein had spent years fashioning these incredibly grotesque household objects out of human body parts. Investigators see objects and artifacts that they couldn't even comprehend.
Would be, in that time period, a series of entirely unexpected, very peculiar, very bizarre, shocking behavior.
What did you use to cut her?
Must be a knife.
You got some knives on that you used for that?
There's knives. You're trying to
Actually, the dialogue was relatively placid and civilized, given what you imagine could have happened back at the police station.
Trying to think last night, you know, I guess that dog woke me up. I went right into did he mention that at the registry? What's that? At yard last night. No, he didn't say anything.
One of the sheriffs that spent just 6 hours in that house went back and physically attacked Ed Gein in his jail cell because he was so disturbed by what he'd seen and so disturbed by what Ed Gein's actions did to him personally.
I thought he was standing there and was having trouble or something like that. And our heart was going so fast.
Schlee shows up and bursts into the cell, grabs Eddie, immediately begins to manhandle him. Schlee was in this uncontrollable blind rage. Schlee immediately wants to know who else Gein has killed, and really has to be pulled off of Gein.
Ed Gein seems like a quiet, sort of unremarkable person, and yet when you compare the image of him to the stuff that police found at his house, it's almost so jarring, and there seems to be a real disconnect between his appearance and the gruesome things that they've discovered at his house.
I can't imagine what it must have been like. You did not know that this ghoul was operating right next to you, and he was insinuated in all of your lives, and he did all of these things.
They probably almost equal to Ed. Don't want people to know about this.
Let's not get into too many details, Ed.
If it's true that there's a ghoul in Plainfield, Wisconsin, then it's also an indictment on the police. It's an indictment on everybody.
The way I remember, I think it was either day or two after that.
My dad was Art Schley, County Sheriff of Waushara County. We lived in the jail at the time. It was no different than living in a home somewhere. That was our home, let's put it that way. This is a picture of us in the jail. It is my mom and myself and my dad, and it's in the office. My bedroom, if you would have cut a hole in the wall, I would have been upstairs by the bullpen. When my dad was voted in as sheriff, it would have been probably the summer of '57. And this case broke the last part of November of '57. He had never had any law enforcement training before this, and so when this big case came about, he really didn't have a lot of experience or a lot of knowledge on how to handle something this big. On the night Ed Gein was arrested, I would have been probably 11 years old. I was in the 6th grade. All these men were sitting in the stairway and I couldn't get up to bed. And I said, why? And that's when I was told what had happened. I can't imagine someone being as normal as he seemed and yet could do such horrible things. Ed was just in the lower level of the jail.
But now, we want to get this all straightened out. Clean that.
I can remember Judge Boyd Clark. He was a very nice-looking, very nice-appearing man, had a young family, and I probably was at his house at one point. I actually had a crush on his son, Nelson Clark.
What did you intend to do with their body, Mr. Warden?
I remember Ed Gein. He lived right across the road from us.
That,
Well, you kind of thought you were there.
that's the way it could be.
People had said my dad roughed up Ed Gein a little bit. I heard he grabbed him by the front of the shirt and pushed him up against the wall. My dad was a friend of Frank Warden because Frank Warden was a deputy of his, and this was his mother. I guess my dad probably was just upset to think one human being could do something so horrific to another human being. I just think maybe it was a normal reaction as why or how could you do something like that?
Yeah, let's go over there and check those graves, huh? You can point out to the district attorney and to me. And get that straightened out first, huh?
You would imagine there would be an outcry. We want to know if Mom is in her grave or not. Did this school take her from her grave? I mean, families would raise a fuss.
I'm afraid that if people found out about that, there might be quite an uprising.
Well, we'll do this, just the three of us.
It is odd that he could just tell them, well, it's this number, and they go, okay, we'll check too. We'll accept that everything is accurate and valid. So that seems kind of sloppy and a little weird.
We've got to find out which of the graves you went in and which grave you took all these heads from.
The phone rang. We were just finishing up supper before we went out to milk the cows. We found out that Eddie had been picked up for killing Mrs. Warden. It was shocking. There hadn't been a whole lot of murders around, you know. You just wait for the news to develop, and it did. It didn't take long.
I went into supper. My sister-in-law, she said, did you know Eddie Gein's killed Mrs. Warden? And I said, do you know that's the biggest damn lie I ever heard? That's just the very words I said.
How long had you known Mr.
7 years.
7 years. What kind of a man did you know him as?
Well, a nice man, just like anybody else. The only difference I'd say in a man, he seems to be a little hot.
Think about this also, 1957. Having an actual news reporter have to say the words, human skin suit, made from local man's mother's body. Like, they didn't want to cover, like, that there were black people in the Olympics. Like, what are they going to, now you have this thing, they're going to literally, like, blow your mind with this piece of information.
The term serial killer doesn't come out for another 20, 30 years after Ed Gein was caught. So Ed Gein's arrest must have been a massive shock to the American psyche and to the world.
I don't remember when I realized what was really going on. Probably it had to do with all the newspaper men, all the media that was there.
They were this small farming community, perfectly happy with being isolated and not being known by the rest of the world. All of a sudden, they're going to have to deal with people like us driving into their town, looking around, going to the graveyard for the rest of the town's existence. Plainfield, Wisconsin, for as long as America exists, will be the hometown of Ed Gein, no matter what.
It was just crazy. After a while, there was so much media there. They'd be sitting on the steps, and we'd have to say, excuse me, can I get upstairs? And they'd have to get up and get out of the way so we could go upstairs. And I mean, they weren't just sitting, one or two of them. The stairs were full of media.
What kind of a man did you know Ed Gein as? Well, he was rather simple-minded, But I always figured he was just perfectly harmless.
You could be a serial killer or just kind of gay, and they would be in Wisconsin, be like, he's just a little different. He's just a little different.
I said he was more or less a pleasant man who would be a nice man to talk to, or somebody would like to have around. He seems to be harmless fella, you know.
Plainfield, it's a home of Ed Gein. It's not on the sign, but it's known. There are hints throughout the town.
On one hand, we're horrified by what happened, like footage of like a car accident or like an earthquake is on one hand just horrifying and scary, but there's something also morbidly exciting about that. And we don't want to look, but we can't look away at the same time because of the nature of the crimes.
It's been years since I've been to Plainfield, but even when I was researching my book, it was a sore subject with a lot of people. There were people who had family members whose bodies had been exhumed by Gein.
You kind of begin to think about it. People are talking about it. That sucker, he's really kind of a sick devil. You've heard of people killing people, but you don't hear them taking them in and gutting them out and all that kind of stuff that Eddie did. He was in a box by himself when it come to his murders.
If you drive around the country, there are all these small towns that take civic pride in being home to whatever. Plainfield was suddenly like, this is the town where Ed Gein committed his crimes.
Here's a picture of my grandpa and grandma's car that my dad would use at times to take Ed Gein to different appointments or something when he thought maybe he'd be followed or something like that.
That's what I have a video of it. I'll show it to you. Press play, and you tell me what you're looking at. It's the triangle in the middle.
Okay, my dad is opening the door for Ed Gein.
Is that your grandfather's car?
Yes. Yep. Ed's covering his face. Ed was always a very polite man. My mother made the meals and done the laundry, and we would help take the meals down. When we take the food tray into him, he'd always thank us for bringing it. I don't know what to say about him saying the man is a nice man when he done what he done. It's a terrible thing for him. It's a terrible thing for the people involved, and it was a terrible thing for the whole community of Plainfield.
After Ed's arrest, he was declared mentally incompetent and consigned to a mental institution.
Competency is not the same thing as insanity. Competency is really, can you understand the meaning of your charges? Can you participate in a knowing manner with your attorney in your own defense? Are you fit to proceed to trial? It's no shock that he'd wind up in a hospital. The crimes are too weird. They're too violent. They're peculiar. Had it been something like a sexual assault or a murder, the commission of a robbery, they would have just thrown him in prison. But this stuff that he did was just too unthinkable and too weird. And, you know, my rule of thumb is if it scares a jury, you go into the hospital. I'm looking at Edward Gein's records from Central State Hospital, and this reflects his intake. What is interesting and consistent with his interview at the police station is that he was found to be coherent. The records are very descriptive, but also, in some respects, contradictory. I mean, on one hand, they talk about his train of thought as coherent and relevant, but sometimes illogical. Now, I don't know what that means. That seems to be an implicit contradiction. They also say that he experiences visual and auditory hallucinations, and yet they then go on to say it's uncertain if these should be designated as overt hallucinations. Well, I don't know what you would call them. There's only two questions you can ask. Is it real or is it not real? They even are curious about whether or not he found, the bodies sexually stimulating, and there's some speculation about that. But I don't see anything where he says that he found the bodies sexually stimulating. Though he's not providing much of an explanation for his own conduct as to what motivates him. It's my sense that they don't have like a really great idea about who this guy is and what would have motivated him to do what he does. They're hedging their bets. They're not really sure themselves that they probably never saw anything like this.
I was a consulting psychologist at Central State Hospital, where in the early 1970s, I had an encounter with Ed Gein, and I must say it was memorable. I was there working hard in this office. I was writing away at the desk. I heard this noise behind me. I just kept on working because I was used to distractions. But then I got thirsty, and so I went out in the hall. I saw Dr. Schubert, and he said to me, "Did you meet Mr. Gein?" And I turned around. There was Mr. Gein. He wasn't very tall, white hair, and he had these tools, a hammer and saw. He'd been trying to put up a partition behind me. I just about fainted. Dr. Schubert goes, "I guess he was taking your measure." He was referring to the idea that Gein had skinned various women and made, like lampshades out of them. I was really upset that Dr. Schubert would do this. I complained to the other people that worked there, and they said, "Oh, Gein's harmless." And there wasn't anything malicious in his eyes. There was only some confusion and concern.
Well, you tell me. I don't know. I've never been out to your place, like I told you.
But this is in the, like I told you, it's like a haze.
It's kind of hazy. But it comes back. Yeah.
Well, no, not clear.
People in general felt kind of sorry for him. It was an odd contrast in terms of this little old man that evoked pity and such sensational crimes. I later asked Dr. Schubert why Gein had done these things. He said that as far as he could figure, that Gein was trying to reconstitute his dead mother. Now, how he would do that, I don't know. But of course, the man was crazy.
This is my copy of the novel Psycho. It's a first edition. Very happy to have a chance to read the first edition as it came out. This is before the film came out. This is as it appeared before all the fame and the hoopla. Robert Bloch is perhaps the best-known writer of horror fiction through the middle part of the 20th century. There's a quote by Stephen King saying, there was nobody better than Bloch, nobody more prolific, nobody more profoundly influential.
And when I graduated from high school in 1934, I sat down and started to write professionally. Sold my first story 6 weeks later. I was 17 then, and I didn't have enough sense to quit.
One of the great contributions that Bloch made to the horror genre was that he realized that what is between the ears can be much more horrible than what's out there rustling in the night. Bloch idolized H.P. Lovecraft, who was 27 years his senior and who would die at a young age. Bloch started off writing that kind of supernatural horror that H.P. Lovecraft is so well known for. But there was a change for Bloch. He started reading psychology textbooks, books by psychologists about the craft of psychology. And so he made a shift, late 40s, early 50s, into writing psychological horror, and as we see exemplified in Psycho, of course.
We have this morass of things happening at the end of the 1950s alongside interest in psychology, interest in psychoanalysis, interest in theories around trauma, interest in what does the family structure mean. And that, I think, makes it a perfect moment for Psycho to really take the country by storm.
Bloch himself was in small town Wisconsin when this small town Wisconsin horror story was being exposed to the world.
That was the reason for the book. When I heard of the Gein case, I didn't hear anything about the details, but I did hear about a apparently ordinary man living an ordinary life in a very small town where he'd been observed by his neighbors for many years and never suspected of his crimes. And I said, that's the story.
He's a nice man, just like anybody else. Perfectly harmless.
I'm going to write a story about a man in a similar situation. Point out to people that they don't necessarily know their neighbors or the people that they come in contact with. And that, to me, is truly horrifying.
For Bloch, the idea that this could be happening in a small town in the middle of Wisconsin, where everybody knows everybody's business, just absolutely fascinated him. It fit in really well with his ideas of psychological horror, that the person you should be afraid of is not the werewolf howling at the moon or some sort of supernatural monster that will come at you in the night. It's the guy sitting a couple seats behind you on the bus. And why is he coming after you? Maybe there's no reason. Maybe he's just coming after you. The life of a pulp fiction writer during this era, the idea wasn't necessarily to create great art all the time. It was to sell your story, get the small payday, sell another story, get the small payday. Bloch reported that it took him 7 weeks from start to finish with Psycho, which is an amazingly kind of brief period of time if you've ever tried to write a novel. But he was also of the generation for whom being prolific was the way to sleep indoors and eat every once in a while.
It is primarily a story of a girl with a secret. She's just stolen $40,000 from her employer. It's about a young man who leads a tortured, secret life, so secret that he himself is not aware of it. And it is about the buried and exhumed secrets of his mother.
Norman Bates, on the surface, he seems sweet, he seems vulnerable, but underneath the surface, there's all kinds of things roiling, there's all kinds of dark psychology that's all wrapped up in, of course, his obsessive relationship to his dead mother.
Bloch considered many titles for the novel. He was inspired by words like psychology and psychoanalysis.
It's about being a psychotic, right? It's about somebody being a psychopath. And that is really different from just saying, this monster is outlandish. This monster can never happen. Here we have a monster who is defined by the inner workings of his brain.
Today, organizations of specialists in mental medicine, like the New York Psychoanalytic Institute, have helped to gain general medical acceptance for such doctrines, considered a radical departure when first advanced by Dr. Sigmund Freud of Vienna some 50 years ago.
It gets us toward a variety of mental illnesses, including some pretty violent and gruesome ones that perhaps the Ed Gein story brought up in Bloch's mind. Psycho didn't sell particularly in any way that was different from his previous work, but it did attract the attention of a film production company. They didn't accept the first offer from this film company that they had never heard of. They accepted the second offer, which was for $9,500, and Bloch's cut was about $6,000 for that, which is a nice payday for a writer of pulp fiction. Bloch was fairly convinced that it was unfilmable. Partly the way that the narrative is kind of structured. We have this main character in the novel. She dies, and you're less than halfway through the novel. And so the idea that this could be filmable successfully, given a Hollywood formula, Bloch was just really kind of doubtful about that. And then he found out that the film company was actually Alfred Hitchcock, who was looking for his next film.
Hitchcock started in England. He's a British director. Eventually, he comes over to the States to make movies here. And that's really where he experiences the vast majority of his success. And when he makes Psycho in 1960, he really hadn't made a straight-up horror movie. That was really the first time that he had done something in that extreme horror genre.
Hitchcock was on a tremendous roll at that point. This is just after North by Northwest. Maybe the rights conversation would have been a little different had Bloch's agent done a bit more homework before signing away the rights.
The power of cinema in its purest form is so vast because it can go over the whole world. On a given night, a film can play in Tokyo, West Berlin, London, New York, and the same audience is responding emotionally to the same things. And no other medium can do this.
Dirty night.
You have a vacancy?
Oh, we have 12 vacancies.
Psycho, the novel, bears a tremendous resemblance to Psycho, the film. But one of the interesting changes that happened between the novel and Hitchcock's interpretation of the novel was that Norman Bates changed subtly. In the novel, he's probably 20 years older. He doesn't look like the young Hollywood leading man of Anthony Perkins, that's for sure. He's described as balding and overweight with an alcohol problem.
Do you go out with friends?
Well, a boy's best friend is his mother.
Norman Bates can never be separated from Tony Perkins, who of course plays him, and plays him so beautifully as this kind of vulnerable character who also houses significant darkness. But then that also was, in some parts, influenced by Ed Gein.
Ed Gein had a little round face. He always would wear like a baseball hat. He'd always thank us or, always say something, greet us in some way, usually. Just a nice little old man, really. He really was, just like all the people said. He couldn't believe that he would do anything that gruesome. I don't know if he snapped or why he would do what he did, but I don't know.
The very, very famous shower scene, which occurs on page 39 out of 180 pages in this edition of the novel. It comes and goes very quickly. The economy of language is stunning in this. You read the novel and you look at that shower scene, the shower scene is very, very, very brief. And it ends a section And it's just a series of very short sentences, declarative sentences. And it comes and goes so quickly, but it's shocking. It's the economy of language that creates the horror for Block in that scene. The last 4 lines of this chapter, Mary started to scream, the curtains parted further, and a hand appeared holding a butcher knife. It was the knife that, a moment later, cut off her scream and her head. And that's the end of the chapter.